It's time to talk about America's team, the New York Knicks. They made a big swing in the off-season. Is it enough? We'll see. Michael Bolton has his opinions.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NBA fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and I see you know your judo well. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always, at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more this summer. As the sports are thinned out, FanDuel's got something for you. Every day, every customer gets a boost or a bonus every single day for every single customer all summer long. Go to FanDuel.com right now to get started. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We're free. We're available on all platforms. Double bang, single bang, triple bang if you want. Whatever. I don't even know how that works, but just do it. It's a great way of helping the show and getting more information into your heads. We're here to talk about this Knicks team. We might as well just get straight into it because they are a really intriguing squad from a fantasy perspective and a real-life perspective, so let's do it now. So he's one of the hosts of the Locked On Knicks podcast. Gavin Schall is here. And when I asked him the best pizza place in New York, he did reference to me, like Michael Scott, that Sbarro's is just always a safe option to go to get those bits of pizza. You always know what you're going to get at Sbarro's, and it's high quality pizza. That's right, isn't it, Gavin?
It's about consistency at the end of the day, Josh. You have to go as far as you're joking, but I'm a vegan, so that really is the extent of my knowledge. Oh, wow. I might really say Sbarro's. Yeah.
So there you go. I think I've had Sbarro's once at like an airport when I was like delayed, and I was like, yeah, I don't know about this. So then we'll go to just when I was in New York, which was 5 years ago, or the last time I was in New York was 5 years ago. We had like one of the $1 slice places just around the corner, and that got smashed pretty hard. That was pretty good. Didn't care what was in it. $1 pizza slices at any time of the day, like breakfast pizza. Let's go. And that was my experience there. But no one cares. We're here to talk New York Knicks. We're here to talk about this team that obviously was really strong the second half of last season. They made a big splash, one of the biggest splashes in the NBA off season. They pushed some really strong performances in the playoffs. But I think also, Gavin, it's maybe a little bit, I don't know if underreported is there. I think we talk so much about the Knicks, but they were out in the second round. Like, we talk about the Thunder, man, how disappointing they were. The 1 seed, then knocked out in the second round. The Knicks were the 2 seed, and they lost in the second round. And we could talk reasons. There's plenty of reasons for that. But it happened. So, like, there is a lot of positive goodwill around this team. And one of the big things that I want to talk about with this squad is, like, we could talk about the positivity of the moves of Bridges, but, like, how much better do you think they actually got? Because they didn't just get Bridges without giving up anything else. Like, they had to, there is a slight, I think, potential change in identity or at least a change in strengths and weaknesses. So, like, it's hard to quantify, but, like, how much better did they actually get?
I think they clearly have a higher ceiling now, and I think they're undeniably better. I do agree with you that I think people are overrating how much better they are. First of all, because to your point before, I think they were incredibly good last year, and there's a world where they might have been the second best team in the NBA if they stayed fully healthy. I think there was a definitive gap between the Celtics and everyone else, but the Knicks net rating, the 1 month they had Anunoby, Randle, and Jalen Brunson, was the best net rating any team put up for any month in the entire season, excluding the Celtics, who put up the same net rating twice. So their ceiling last year was as high as any team in the league, including the Celtics, at least in the regular season. I think in the playoffs, Boston, especially if Porzingis had been healthy, was a different animal. To address your question, though, I think Isaiah Hartenstein was an incredibly substantial loss. There's a reason one of the smartest organizations in the NBA decided to give him nearly $30 million a year and put it at a number that the Knicks obviously just couldn't reach. And I think Hartenstein wanted to be back in New York, but his hand was sort of forced with how much more money they were paying him. And it's going to look a little different because even though Hartenstein wasn't a shooter, he was just so intuitive about figuring out ways to create space, whether it was like little pin-in screens to seal a defender and create a corner three-pointer for Dante DiVincenzo, operating as a dribble handoff guy, operating as one of the best passing big men at the top of the key, like an explosive offensive rebounder. Like, he just brought so much to your offense, while Mitchell Robinson is exceptionally elite at one thing on offense. That is offensive rebounding. He's no longer elite, or at least he hasn't been the last 2 seasons at finishing, when at one point he was the NBA's record holder for field goal percentage in a year. And because of that, it changes the geometry of the floor for the Knicks. We're going to get into more, but it makes things much, much harder on Julius Randle. I still think the Knicks have an unbelievable amount of depth, particularly on the wing. I think they're going to be super versatile. I think they're going to be a great defense. I think Brunson is a bona fide top 5 to 7 player in the NBA at this point. They are really, really, really good. If they had kept Hartenstein, I would be extremely confident in their ability to compete for a title this year. But I think it is hard to overstate how big of a loss he was.
I think that's true. But let's talk about the positives. Let's talk about who arrived. So Mikal Bridges is the big one. They do bring in Cameron Payne for whatever reason, I'm not sure. Tyler Kolek in the second round of the draft. Keita Bates-Diop as part of the Bridges trade. And then Pacom Dadier, who was their first round pick. And this is going to be the one and only time that I talk about Dadier on this show. Gavin, over under 70.5 minutes total for the season for Dadier.
Oh, good question. I'm going to say under. I think
that's fair.
I think he plays mop-up duty maybe 10 times the whole year.
So he's going to get the Charlie Brown. He's going to get the Jacob Toppin, the Dwayne Washington. Who was the other guy? Daquan Jeffries. The last 5 guys on the Knicks roster last season combined for about 100 minutes.
Gosh, it's a testament to how good you are at your job that you know those names.
Because I always would just look at that team and go, man, they're stacked. But what is going on? And then people can criticize Tibbs for the minutes. I get it, but also, bro, what's going on at the back end of this roster? None of these guys don't make any sense, but this guy does make sense, and that is Mikal Bridges. He comes across. We don't have to talk about the value of the trade and the picks and all that sort of stuff. Bridges did not succeed as the number 1 option in Brooklyn, but he does not need to be the number 1 option here for the Knicks. So I guess the question to you, Gavin, on him, he is the biggest addition. That's the question that I ask people, who's the biggest addition coming in, and that's what he is. Is he low usage, 16 usage, high defense, high 64% 2-point percentage Phoenix Bridges? Is he closer to Brooklyn Bridges? Where does his role sort of fit on this team now?
Yeah, I think it's somewhere in the middle and probably a little bit closer to Phoenix Bridges. But the Knicks are, as we saw last year, when the Knicks finished the season with their 5 or maybe their 6 highest paid players all on the bench injured, there are going to be injuries. So there will be times where he has to be Nets Bridges or close to Nets Bridges. There will be bench minutes where he has to be Nets Bridges or close to Nets Bridges. But in the context of the starting lineup, I think he will be in a slightly elevated version of that role. But that's honestly kind of the role he was playing the year he was traded, where you saw him on the Suns start to have these random 30-point games and games where he took 17, 18, 19, 20 shots. So I think it will be closer to that. And I think that's the way he was heading on the Suns regardless. But I think you're going to see, obviously, a lot of the efficiency come back, where during his time in Phoenix, he was just flat out, on top of being a great defender, one of the more efficient, 16, 17 point per game scorers in basketball. It was incredible from 2-point range. Had years where he shot close to 70% from 2-point range, which you never ever see from a wing playing 35 plus minutes per game on a great team. That was ridiculous. Was a 40% 3-point shooter. I think we get closer to that. And he does get a couple of possessions a game where he gets to cook, he gets to run the offense a little bit, because there were moments where that looked good in Brooklyn. Obviously overall was a failure, but it was also one of the hardest contexts to succeed in the NBA with essentially no help around him. And there's probably 25 guys, maybe 30 who could have scored 25 plus points per game. Not even 25, 20 plus points per game on good efficiency in that context. So I think he's going to be fantastic. He's going to fit in pretty seamlessly. The only question I have about him in the starting lineup is how it looks with the shooting trade-off from him to Dante DiVincenzo, where he pushes DiVincenzo to the bench. And Bridges is a fantastic shooter. DiVincenzo is one of the 5 to 10 best shooters in the league. And can the Knicks survive that spacing with Mitchell Robinson and for Hartenstein? That's kind of my big concern coming into the year, if you want to use the word big lightly.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's going to be a change versus what they were doing at the second. And there's one elephant in the room, which we are going to talk about later on in terms of how that all works together. But the Bridges stuff is interesting, because you're right. That 56 games that he played in Phoenix before he was traded, where his usage went from 15 the year before up to 19 in that season. But what did happen there is, we look at his efficiency, which was through the roof. His effective field goal percentage dropped down to 53 in that time, and he's almost the poster child for that. The the negative correlation between usage and shooting percentages. The usage comes down, he's unbelievably efficient. The usage goes up, well, he can't really sustain that. And that was, again, pushed to the limit last season. So the efficiency will rise. I don't think he's got any shot of that bringing back to Phoenix usage unless he goes back to being a 15% usage player, which I don't think that that's what exactly is going to happen. The key thing, I guess, again, for him is going to be what happens with some of the defensive numbers, and we can look at some of his defensive stuff, which has dropped, but it's not as big of a drop as I think we thought. Like, his steal percentage was great back in the 2020 season, but it's been at like 1.6 to 1.4 in each of the last 4 years. So it's been very, very similar there. So he's a great addition. His role is going to be very different to in Brooklyn. He's going to be, an increase in efficiency, but probably not back to Phoenix. But, it's a very clear, player that in terms of what you traded out to get him, like that player value is important. But the thing you brought up is interesting, and that's what that does for a Donte DiVincenzo, which we will get into in a second. But before we do that, I do have to tell you that today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Schedules are packed. There's a certain NBA coach I know that's got like a very, very broad range of interests, and he doesn't spend 35 hours a day looking at film, and he takes all that time for self-care, and you should be taking that time for self-care as well. That can be a key part of making sure the other things that you need to do, your responsibilities, the busy things, get done properly and shown the proper level of care. And one of the things you could do for self-care is therapy, and that's where BetterHelp can come in. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. You fill out a questionnaire, they match you up with a therapist to see who the best fit is. You meet with them. If it doesn't work out, hey, you can just choose to change to a new therapist at no charge, because getting that rapport is one of the key success things in therapy. So don't skip therapy day and get to BetterHelp. Go to betterhelp.com/lockedonnba today to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedonnba. Gavin, I've told this story on the show before, but I haven't told you this story. When I was in Vegas for Summer League, we were staying at a hotel with about 10 to 12 NBA teams, and they were all sort of stationed around the area of the hotel that we were staying in, so that I just saw them everywhere, right? So one night after I'd come back from Summer League, we'd gone out for dinner. We went to our little lobby bar in the hotel right near where our room was, and the elevators to go upstairs, and a bunch of Knicks people were down there, and old mate Tom Thibodeau was down there as well. So I'm lining up at the bar and getting a drink with my partner, and he's behind me with two other guys. It's a loud bar. And then I just hear, I hear one snippet of the conversation, and it's some guy, I don't know who it was, going, so, I won't do the accent, but he's like, so, how do you approach late game timeout situations? And then Tibbs sort of just adjusts his shirt. So, all right, let's go. And just starts at 11 p.m. at night, just starts talking late game timeout situations in Vegas on a Saturday night. I go, bro, can you just have a drink and shut up?
Oh my God.
What are you doing? What are you, and at first, because I didn't actually know he was there behind me until I turned around and went, of course. Of course this man is talking timeout strategy in a Vegas bar at 11 p.m. And I thought, you know what, that is just the perfect encapsulation of what this man is as a coach, for good and for bad. But what we do want to talk about now are the guys that have moved on from this team. And we've talked Isaiah Hartenstein, they had Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks, who were trade deadline acquisitions and didn't really do a huge amount. Shake Milton, who didn't do a huge amount. Mamadi Diakite, who didn't do a huge amount. But yeah, so those guys, Bogdanovic, Burks, Milton, Diakite, are all part of that Bridges deal. The Hartenstein one, we have touched on that, and I don't want to harp significantly on Isaiah Hartenstein, because again, he's not a part of the team anymore, but it's more about what do we do now to replace him? Obviously, the oft-injured Mitchell Robinson will be in position to start, but now the options behind him, we're talking Precious Achiuwa, who was just re-signed, and Jericho Sims, and two-way guy Ariel Hukporti. It does change what this team does, because and I criticized Tibbs the season before for not recognizing that he could use Isaiah Hartenstein the same way that he used to use Joakim Noah, but he did start to do that this season. He started to realize, we can actually get our center to be involved in passing actions, but now he can't, because those guys that are remaining are terrible at that. They can't do any of that sort of thing. So the loss of Hartenstein, you said already, it's a big deal. How do they cover this? What changes? Do they just morph more into perimeter stuff? How do they fix this issue that, again, it's not an issue yet, but it looks like it might be?
Yeah, I think it's hard because it's further complicated by Julius Randle coming back, right? Because if there's a world where they traded Randle for something else, or for some reason he was still injured to start this year, and you open the season with Brunson, DiVincenzo, Bridges, and Anunoby as your starting lineup, I would say there's just enough versatility, enough shooting at your 1 through 4 that, like, all right, like the spacing is maybe not as optimal as it would have been with Hartenstein, but it's still like incredibly good for any team in the world. And with Randle back in there, I think he gets a little bit trickier. And that's not to crap on Randle, who's 2 seasons removed from like halfway through the year. He literally made more threes than anyone else in the NBA. So Randle's capable of shooting at volume, and he might have to come back to that. It's just a little bit of a shame because Randle, I thought, found a really good rhythm and identity after just a disastrous first 6 or 7 games last year. Yeah. Embracing, that was ugly, man. We were talking about trading him. But just embracing his inner bulldozer and just like destroying people. And that's ironically kind of how he got hurt, like getting flipped over by Jaime Jaquez, just attacking the basket. But he was destroying people, and he was so much better. Like you can look into the stats if you want the specifics, but with Hartenstein on the floor, then with Robinson on the floor, was Hartenstein just very intuitively, as I mentioned before, knew how to create just enough space that Randle could go down there and there wouldn't be a center parked in the lane. Mitchell Robinson, conversely, is about as rim-bound as any center in recent NBA history is. And I'm wondering if the Knicks, like over the summer, like obviously Mitch is never going to be in the same stratosphere as Hartenstein at that stuff. And they're not going to use him as a passer or a fulcrum. But I wonder if they made him work on just like, all right, screening off the ball and like being aware, hey, Dante's in the corner, go like set a screen on his guy, and just finding ways to get out of the lane and weaponizing just his size so that a center kind of has to be at least have like a cursory awareness of him being away from the rim, and that could open things up for Julius Randle. But I think that's going to be an uphill battle, and I'm wondering if the Knicks, at some point this year, we can get into it later, but I wonder if there's going to be a trade there. I wonder if Mitchell Robinson could be involved in a trade there, and they get someone who gives you a little bit more stylistic versatility. The in-house version, way to address that is to play small, which we know Tom Thibodeau, throughout the Obi Toppin era, famously opposed to playing that way. I wonder if he'll be a little bit more amenable if you replace Obi Toppin, who is a subpar defender and pretty much a non-existent rim protector, unless he's just like chasing and it's a help side block, with OG Anunoby, who for his size is a fantastic rim protector, 6'8", 7'2", 7'3" wingspan, obviously super strong and looked fantastic playing as a help side rim protector, but also as a primary guy on Joel Embiid at the tail end of that Game 4 against the Sixers. We've heard kind of like reports musings since that Thibodeau would have gone to that a little bit more if it weren't for the fact that Anunoby was hurt late in the season. They didn't get to really experiment with it, but I think playing small, getting your best 5 on the court with Brunson, DiVincenzo, Bridges, Anunoby, Randle would be the way to go. The only issue with that is it relies on Julius to do a lot of chasing defensively. That the Knicks in the playoffs, they had Precious Achiuwa to do that, and Achiuwa is up for that. So you can maximize your offensive ceiling by having Randle in there. Defensively, it might get a little dicey, not only because you're small at the rim, but it asks Julius Randle to run around, cover a lot of ground, help and double, and he is not particularly active on defense. So there are drawbacks either way, but to me, like if the Knicks are facing the Celtics, it's Game 7, and there's 8 minutes left in that game, like that is the lineup I'm rolling with down the stretch. I don't really see a world where you're playing Mitchell Robinson against Kristaps Porzingis, and the Knicks are able to win that series. Ideally, they'd get a center who could protect the rim and shoot threes. Those guys don't exactly grow on trees, so that's where the challenge is for the Knicks.
The interesting thing with this team is like Robinson's had some real success as an offensive rebounder, even in the playoffs, and as a guy that is that rim roller sort of player. Okay, so if you ask Mitchell Robinson if he can do other stuff, he's going to tell you, everyone's just been holding me back for years. But the other thing is, if he gets hurt, which seems to happen all the time with his lower body, like then you're cooked, because then you're running Precious Achiuwa, who I just don't think is very good, and you're running Jericho Sims, and that is just a bad combination, and that is where things start to become really dicey. But we're going to talk about the projected starting group now, which, again, I don't really think there's a debate here. Brunson, Bridges, Anunoby, Randle, and Robinson. There will be some people who are watching this or listening to it after the fact who will say, they'll just start Randle at center and we'll get Dante or Josh Hartenstein. There's almost zero chance that Tom Thibodeau does that. It's just not going to happen. And what I do want to focus a little bit on here is Jalen Brunson, because Brunson was obviously awesome last season. He was a guy that finished top 5 in the MVP. But one thing I think is maybe not mentioned is that at the start of the season, when Julius Randle was there, like pre-Christmas, he wasn't at the same level that he was in the second half of the season, especially when Randle was out. When his usage had to jump up, it did jump up at a huge level. And now we're in a situation where Bridges arrives, where Randle arrives back, and Anunoby plays a full season. So when we look at the totality of what Brunson did last season, especially his second half, his last 3 to 4 months, which is really the driving force behind his All-NBA and MVP nods, how does he maintain that? I don't think he can keep at that exact same level numbers-wise. Play-wise, sure. But I think he's going to have to pull that all back given the way this team currently looks.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and honestly, probably something we haven't talked about enough on the podcast this summer. And you just, Josh, I appreciate you just planning future episodes for me here when we need them in the dead of summer. Because I do think that's a conversation worth having. And the only pushback I have on that is he does just seem to be a second half player in some ways. Like the year before his first season on the Knicks, he was also just dramatically better. The second half of the year when Julius, obviously not in the playoffs, but at most of the tail end of the regular season, was healthy and was in the roster. I think the one thing to note is it's just so clearly his show now, even if he's going to be especially if Randle ends up, well, I guess the extension wouldn't kick him this year, but even though he's not going to be the highest paid guy on the team, New York, it's not just his team. New York is his city at this point. So I think he will be given some amount of leeway to just sort of cook, for lack of a better term, and to do his thing, to have stretches where he's having 6 shots in 8 possessions and stuff. So I think he will have to scale it back a bit, though, because to your point, you have to get Bridges' shot. OG Anunoby, despite the new contract, I think he's still going to have aspirations of being a higher scoring guy. And that was part of his issue in Toronto. And the last time he played healthy for the Knicks, he looked fantastic, scoring basically 28 points in 2.5 quarters against the Indiana Pacers. Dante DiVincenzo is going to be playing less minutes when he's on the court. You better expect he's going to be shooting a 3 pretty much every minute or two he's on the floor. Josh Hart is going to have to get some offense. The Knicks have just so many mouths to feed. And it's kind of the one complicating factor of having this incredible depth and having this incredible team. How does everyone eat? And Jalen is not a quintessential 90s point guard, where he's just trying to feed everyone and just trying to set everyone up. He is obviously very much shoot first. And I'm wondering what kind of balance he's going to strike. To me, I think it's really big. Early in the year, we saw him add the 25-foot plus 3 to his game. And I'm hoping another year to work on that, because it sort of faded as the year went on. He has more of that, and he can get his points even more efficiently this year, taking more threes, continuing to hit them at a 40% rate. And in doing so is able to have a few less possessions where he's dicing people up, getting to the lane, shooting a floater, which obviously for him is a fantastic shot, because he's better at that than any player in the NBA. And yet you're going to want Mikal Bridges taking corner threes. You're going to OG Anunoby taking corner threes. You're going to have to give Julius enough possessions to keep him to keep him content, especially if that extension is not signed and he has money on the line. I think that ego, and also him knowing that he's playing for money that he passed up on his previous contract, that could be a factor, and chemistry could be a factor. So it's going to be a tough balancing act. I just think Brunson's always going to be the first to eat, so I'm not incredibly worried about it.
He is, I think. And what I'm going to put up on the screen, you won't be able to see this, Gavin, but I'm going to show the usage percentage of Jalen Brunson as the season goes on. And you can see, for those of you watching this on the video, you can see where it sits. It's around that 26 mark, 27 mark for most of the season. And then we hit January, and that's where it hits to 33, 34, 35. And his end of season number was 31.5%. But he was running at 35 usage for the final 2.5, 3 months of the season. And that's just not compared to being at 27 to begin the year, which was up from the year before. That number is, it's going to be really hard, I think, to maintain that level of usage. But I think that's an interesting graph to show when people think about Brunson and the value on his, fantasy numbers. We just got to consider what that team looked like second half of the season. We've got more stuff to talk about later on, because today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. The summer, they've got offers for you, because we know that in the summer, it's not about all these leagues running. They slow down. That's what happens. They're going to come back soon, though, don't worry. But there's still stuff going on. Major League Baseball, the Olympics winding down at the moment. We're going to have the WNBA resuming. We're going to have college football not far away. NFL preseason is starting back, and FanDuel is going to cover you off, because they wanted to give you something through the summer. Every day, every customer gets one of two things: a boost or a bonus. That is every day for every customer. We get a boost or a bonus on FanDuel Sportsbook. So go ahead to FanDuel.com. Maybe you want to check out the odds of Jalen Brunson for MVP or the Knicks for the NBA title. That's going to be there as well. And you've got your boost and your bonuses that you can go and check that out with. So go to FanDuel.com right now and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel is an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. And don't forget to gamble responsibly. All right, so we looked at your projected starters there. Gavin, let's look at the projected bench group again. Very hard for me to have any arguments here with this at all. Juice McBride, Dante DiVincenzo, Josh Hart, and Precious Achiuwa. Now, the narrative of the Knicks and the memory of the Knicks of people is Josh Hart playing 46 minutes a night and DiVincenzo, shooting the lights out and being second or third in total threes made. But again, at the beginning of the season when this team was healthy, before the trades, they were playing like 23 minutes a night, 26 minutes a night, and they're going to be back in these bench roles. Now, we can mix and match all this stuff, but if there's one thing that old mate Thomas Thibodeau loves, and he's got to pump minutes into those starters. So the role of these players, DiVincenzo and Hart in particular, it has to be lower than last season.
Yeah, I think to me, that's maybe my single biggest question coming into the year. Like, how are you going to give those guys the minutes that they deserve? And maybe even DiVincenzo more than Hart, because I think Hart's game can scale down okay. And not that DiVincenzo's can't, but he became just a completely different player than who he'd ever been, finishing third in the NBA and made threes last year. And that was because he was given that ultra green light that he's never, obviously Milwaukee didn't have that. Sacramento didn't have that. In Golden State, he had it, but in a very finite role. Last year, he was empowered in a way he never has been. It's the same thing you're seeing in FIBA where Bogdanovich is torching, obviously always a good player, but he's torching Team USA and guys you would never expect him to torch. When guys are given more shots, when guys are having confidence pumped into them, they become very different players. And I think it's going to be very tricky with Dante for him not to lose that. And it's another reason why I think that small ball lineup, Josh, especially before there's a trade for another center, assuming there will be a trade for another center, it's so important to get that lineup on the court because it allows you to make sure that OG Anunoby can play 32 minutes and Dante DiVincenzo can still play close to 30 on any given day. And even someone like Deuce McBride, who was just for the most part, a couple bad games in Indiana, but fantastic for the Knicks throughout the playoffs. I had him in my projections at 13 minutes a game for this season. And that he's someone who on a good team probably should be playing 18 to 22. And he's just not going to get that in New York next year. And that's not even talking about Tyler Kolek, who Ian Begley referred to as the Knicks backup point guard. And I was all right, does that mean they're going to trade Deuce? Because right now there are no minutes for Kolek available. Sure. So I don't know what's going on there, but it is going to be tricky. Hard decisions are going to be made. To me, lineup creativity is a prerequisite. We saw Tom Thibodeau, I think, lean into that last year more than he ever had for someone who was always accustomed to just doing hardcore line changes and nothing else. He got better at staggering and having Julius Randle be the fulcrum of the bench unit and having OG Anunoby prop it up. The good news is the non-Brunson minutes, which in the past have killed the Knicks in the playoffs in particular. I'm really not concerned about that this year because they're just going to be able to load those lineups with DiVincenzo, with Bridges, with Randle, with Anunoby. Three of those four guys, you're going to have enough offense. You're going to have enough defense. So I think that's where the Knicks are going to be so strong this year. But I am a little bit concerned about scaling back Dante DiVincenzo, how that affects his game, how that affects his confidence.
We've talked quite a bit already about Mitchell Robinson, but he is the key injury update. Well, the other guys, OG Anunoby, I'm pretty sure he's okay. But Robinson had surgery on his ankle after a weird situation where the Knicks applied for a disabled player exception, and then he miraculously returned 2 months before that would have meant that he was ruled out for, but then he hurt it again. So where are we at with Mitch at the moment and this ankle surgery? He's full ready to go for the start of the season?
Yeah, as far as I know, he's slated to be ready to return for the start of the year. I don't think there's really any concern. Maybe it'll be very slowly scaling up in training camp and keeping his minutes a little bit down at the start of the year. But I haven't heard anything that he's not going to be there for the start of the year. I think Julius Randle, it's going to be a little bit tighter, but I would expect both those guys to be in the lineup on night one.
Yeah, and then OG missed time and Brunson missed time, but we're expecting them all at this point to be healthy as we head into the coming season. Now, a player, you ask all the hosts this, who the player is to watch for the upcoming season, and your call on that was you want to see, or you want to watch, everyone to keep their eye, breakout or whatever it is, on OG Anunoby, who came across, had that elbow injury, then had a hamstring injury, and never really sort of got settled in New York. He did change some of his stats versus in Toronto, where some of his defensive numbers were down. They jumped back up in New York. What are you wanting to see, or what's the expectation of a full healthy season? Which again, who knows? What do you think OG is going to be providing?
Yeah, I mean, health is obviously the big thing. And it's so funny because whenever a player gets a contract like that, you always see fans kind of like focus in on their weaknesses and say, all right, he has to fix this up if he's going to be worthy of that contract. And obviously there's stuff you'd like to see him add offensively, but the thing he has to fix up is ultimately out of his control. And that's his injury history, particularly like when you go through it. And it's similar to, obviously Joel Embiid has like the foot instability issues that have led to a lot of lower leg stuff, but it's similar to Joel Embiid in that it's a lot of freak injuries over the course of his career. And it's hard to draw a through line through them and say, all right, it's this one body part that's always going to bug him and always going to have a cascade effect. And he's going to be compensating. He's going to get hurt. Like it really hasn't been that. It's been like one thing after another. Like even the wrists last year, that was sort of out of nowhere. The hamstring, like, feels a little out of nowhere. Like he didn't have like a huge history of hamstring injuries, and yet like they happen and they continue to happen to him. And you just hope there's a way that he has to stay healthy, because like we saw last year, more than anyone on this team, like he made or broke the New York Knicks the net rating. I'm pulling up the on off stats. Now he was plus 23.4, plus 23.9. That was a 100th percentile on cleaning the glass in the NBA. This is not a real number, but the expected win statistic they have on cleaning the glass is plus 41 wins after he joined the Knicks, which is obviously the difference between the worst team in the NBA maybe and the best team in the NBA. So he made an extraordinary difference. Every lineup he was in was fantastic. Of course, like they finished, I think in games where he's fully healthy, something like 26-5, which is the equivalent of like a 65-win team or maybe even more than that when he was on the court. And I'm also wondering, just from a skill set perspective, whether he can lean into his bully ball ways, because I think Julius going out was kind of good for him in the sense that like there were these stretches where you just needed him to create offense, because especially against the Sixers, like there were games where Dante just didn't have it and the Knicks needed a second option, and OG would like kind of burrow his way in for an elbow jumper. And that Pacers game, like he looked like Kawhi Leonard for 2.5 quarters. And of course, you don't expect that from him every game. That role is just not available for him. But you just see these flashes from him that make you think, all right, maybe there's a little bit more in terms of an ability to hunt a mismatch. And especially if the Knicks ever lean into that small ball lineup, like inevitably he will have a mismatch and he could use his speed or use his strength depending on what kind of defender another team decides to throw at him. So I'm hoping there is just a little bit more individual offense. Obviously at this age, in this context, like he's not going to have a breakout. He's not going to average more than 20 points per game. I do think there's a little bit more there. And I think especially in the playoffs where teams force you to go your third, fourth, fifth option, there will be times where the Knicks could lean into that a little bit. And I'm hoping he's worked on that this offseason, on top of course, just being healthy and being able to stand up to maybe playing some minutes at the 5.
He only played 23 of the 51 games he was available in New York, which obviously is a very small amount. And his usage did drop down to the lowest number it had been since the 2020 season, down to under 17% in New York versus when it was at 18 in Toronto, and then it had been 19 and 20 in previous years. His three-point shooting was pretty solid, but we have some, like, OG's steal numbers and block numbers are good. If he plays center, that helps those overall numbers, but there is that concern about, when he plays and the others play and how the shots get distributed, that there's going to be a problem to try and assess with a lot of guys on this team. That brings us to the big elephant in the room, and that is Julius Randle, because he's the guy that you listed here as the make or break player. We know that when he went out, whether it's coincidence or not, the team got better. They pushed to, not that it got better, but they became that number 2 seed. They became this team that everyone wanted to watch. They became the Villanova boys because Randle wasn't there. And now we have to reintegrate him. Now there'll be people who say, well, this is a multi-time all-star, multi-NBA player. He's going to make them better. Then there'll be the other side going, yeah, but he makes everyone else worse. So what's the net negative, or what's the net approach and how that all happens? In terms of the make or break portion of it, I think that's what it is. It's like, can Randle not be all Randle all the time? Like, how does he let these other guys breathe and figure that stuff out? How does he not become... There are plenty of times when he becomes, petulant if something doesn't go his way, and not running back on defense, or not playing into that full team ethos, which is what really pushed this team forward the second half of the season. So I think that's where some of the levels of concerns you have to be with Julius Randle for this upcoming season. Do you see him taking, like, not a backseat, but pulling back some of this usage and ball dominance and buying more into that? Or is it just going to be Julius Randle?
Yeah, so there's a lot there, and some of it we've already touched on, so I'll try not to be too repetitive. But I just reiterate, they played like as well as any team played in the NBA in any given month, when they had him, OG Anunoby, and Jalen Brunson. So they showed a really high ceiling. I don't think they were ultimately better without Randle. To your point, it allowed them to lean into certain things that you just can't with him, like particularly Brunson going from like maybe a third-team All-NBA guy to like, is he the MVP? Like, could you make a case that he's the MVP? And you lose that with Julius back on the court. You lose not some of the shooting from that team because Julius is a pretty similar level shooter to Hart. I'm not quite sure he's a more willing shooter than Hart. So you could argue he's a better and more effective spacer than Hart, except for the fact that there are times where he's just going to take the ball and ram his way to the rim and not do it as quickly as someone like Hart does. And that clogs up spacing. So I'm sure there's a stat out there that screams it. It's hard to tell what that trade-off is. I think what you could say without question is that the version of this team with Bridges and Anunoby at the 3-4 obviously is better space than it is with Julius Randle out there. And again, the other big like note on that and big caveat on that is he got that done with Isaiah Hartenstein. And he was inarguably a different player when he was paired with Mitchell Robinson, and the spacing just doesn't work for years. Like, I think in Julius's defense, and we have ripped him a million times over on Locked On Knicks for the stuff that you're mentioning. You hear all of New York is chiming in right now, Josh. We've killed the guy, and yet like he has never really been set up to succeed in terms of the surrounding pieces around him. Having Jalen Brunson as a lefty score first guy who's an option ahead of him for 90% of his tenure, having RJ Barrett with him, who's another lefty score first guy who only shoots effectively for the most part. Not anymore. Not in Toronto, apparently. In Toronto, he's Steve Kerr out there. But on the Knicks, he was not a three-point shooter unless he was wide open inside the arc. And having Mitchell Robinson, who's always parked at the rim. The Knicks were like, it was like playing a video game on like, I'll use the NCAA football example. I wasn't playing that right now, like on All-American mode, on Heisman mode, every single time for Julius Randle. And I do think like the pieces, the spacing they're going to put around him, even without Hartenstein, having three bona fide shooters at the other three spots at all time is still such an upgrade over what he ever had in New York. And he made 2 All-NBAs despite that. I do think you hit the nail on the head saying like, all right, what parts of his game is he going to lean into? Because when they got OG Anunoby, he was still scoring. He was still having monster games. But he was a little bit of a quicker passer. He's always been a good passer. He's always put up good assist numbers. But early in his Knicks tenure, that meant pound the ball, wait for the double or triple team, then whip a no-look cross-court pass over your head and hope, almost like a football play, my second football analogy, that Reggie Bullock is where he's supposed to be running a post to the opposite elbow, and he could hit a lightly contested three. That's how the Knicks played in 2021, and the Knicks, the surrounding talent is just too good to justify that anymore. Mitchell Robinson being there does not allow you to justify that anymore. He has to be a quick decision maker. He has to be proactive in terms of his passing. He's done that in spurts. I thought he absolutely did that after the OG Anunoby trade. I thought he played for the most part with some bad shots mixed in that are okay because he's a good enough player to warrant it. I thought he mostly played really unselfishly. To me, it's more so on the defensive end. Like this is the ultimate year that he has to, for like the third year in a row, be in the best shape of his life, has to be active, can't be inert. And I question how much that can be learned late in an NBA career because the athleticism has never been questioned. He's always held up surprisingly well when star players try to attack him one-on-one. To me, it's the activity, it's the awareness off the ball. And just in terms of motor, in terms of defensive IQ, I wonder if that's something he can get better at. But whatever the ceiling is, he has to hit it for the Knicks to hit their ceiling. And the other factor there is obviously that they haven't agreed to an extension with him yet. And if that doesn't get done coming into the year, it is going to loom large as the Knicks see what the fit is. If they have an extension with him, it is highly, highly unlikely. Bobby Marks reported, I didn't know this. I thought you couldn't trade him if he signed an extension within 6 months. Apparently it is possible, depending on what the number is and what the number of years are. It is highly unlikely they trade him if he agrees to an extension, though. But if he doesn't, and things aren't going well, or he's clearly not a good fit, maybe the Knicks try to lean into Brunson ball, try to trade for something else. But I think people who make that argument are underrating the talent and the fact that the Knicks just need a second guy who can go and get a bucket. To your point, in a playoff context, Mikal Bridges has not proven to be that guy. Julius hasn't either, but I think the potential is there. I don't think that potential is there for anyone else on the Knicks. And to hit their ceiling, they basically need him to be the best version of himself.
They do. They need him to do that because there is a value and a skill in being able to generate that shot when things are tough. He's also one of those weird players that we look at and go, yeah, Julius Randle has improved as a shooter, but like, has he? Like he had one season.
It's every other year, Josh. Every other year.
It's not even that. Like I'm looking at the numbers. He had the 41% shooting season when there was no crowds, the post-COVID year. But if we just go back from this last season from 31%, 34%, 31%. Okay,
but Josh, that 34 was like on the highest volume in the league. So I would consider that an improvement, even though it's not the 40. But sorry, go ahead.
It was. But like these numbers, like 31, 34, 31, 41, 28, 34, 22. And that's back to his Lakers and Pelicans days. So there's been some improvement, but he's like the volume is there. He's willing to take them, but it's like debatable if they're going to be really bad or they're going to be average and where it all sits. And that's going to be a key part of this. And I think, when I'm doing all these shows, we've got a number of things that we talk about, and the next part of the show we talk about, major storylines and burning questions, but in the end, it all, I think, is just going to come down to one thing, and it all ties in. So to me, the major storyline of this team is, the change, the removal of Dante DiVincenzo and his shooting from the starting lineup, and how does that work? And then to me, the next, the burning question I was going to ask you is the same sort of thing. It's like, will the big fella Tom Thibodeau ever lean into small ball? Because he needs to. This is where we need to do it, but he's shown that he never will. Is it going to change? But that's all this stuff. It's all about, how does Randle fit? How do you deal with DiVincenzo's shooting? How do you, to get the best players on the court, on the team, you need to move away from something that Thibodeau has never done. So, will he? Will he do that? Will he actually play, either whether it's Randle or Anunoby at center? Will it actually happen?
I have no idea. I'd be making a lot more money if I knew for sure. But I think I would be surprised if that lineup does not get minutes during the regular season. I think it will have to get minutes, to your point, if Mitchell Robinson's hurt and they don't trade for another center. There's just no way you can justify not playing that way, at least a little. You're going to play Precious at 48 minutes a game. I don't think so.
But he did it last season. Wasn't Precious playing 40 minutes a night at one point?
Yep. There were stretches, so he could try. But I do think in his defense, with Anunoby getting hurt, he really did not have much of a chance to trial it during the regular season. And biggest game of the year, I was there in person, Josh, in Philadelphia, game 4 against the Sixers. He had both of his centers, and he leaned, or Mitch maybe was hurt at that point, but he had Hartenstein, and he leaned into that small ball. It was with Precious on the floor, but it was with OG Anunoby playing the 5. And again, the big concern there is, if you're going to play with the best version of your offensive lineup, which I think that lineup might score so well that the defense almost doesn't matter, except for the fact that, to your point, it's going to make Tom Thibodeau choke on his own vomit and maybe die on the court, which we obviously don't want. I do want to see them lean into that lineup. I have real questions about the defense and how it translates. I wonder if Mikal Bridges, he's never really been a great shot blocker for all of his length. If he could lean into that a little bit, between him and OG just flying around and kind of protecting the rim by committee, even if you have to get Josh Hart involved and give up a little shooting, that lineup is another guy who's just sturdy and can hold up on some post-ups. There are different ways they can go where I think the defense can be just good enough and the offense will just be so ungodly that they'll be okay. But to answer your question, I think that lineup maybe averages 5 minutes, 6 minutes a game. And it's not even playing every game. It's playing some nights against some opponents. But Tibbs has shown, when something's working, to his credit, even if it's not in his nature, he'll lean into it a little bit and he'll commit to it and he'll stick with it if it's looking good, if it's working well on that particular night. It's just, does he ever get there? So my conservative estimate right now is you get 5-6 minutes of that, which I don't think is enough. I think in the playoffs, to me, that should probably be your closing lineup. Pending a trade, is he ever going to get there? I'm not sure. And it might depend on the team that they're playing, if that's even worth it. But to me, that's the highest ceiling that this team has.
Your bold prediction is something, again, that we've teased all the way through, because it's, again, everything just sort of has to sort of cycle around this one part, and that's what happens at center. And your prediction is that Knicks will try and move on from Mitchell Robinson, gather together the bulk of their assets, and get a center upgrade that gives them more stylistic versatility, is the way you eloquently put it. So, stylistic versatility, what does that mean? Let me just say this. Does that mean Miles Turner / Miles Turner prototype?
Yes, that's what I'm thinking of, because if you're Tom Thibodeau, you're not going into the playoffs without a starting center that can protect the rim, and maybe Wendell Carter or someone like that is the more realistic version. The issue for the Knicks is the cap mechanics get very, very tricky. And the downside of having all these good players is all right, if you want to get someone else that fits a little bit better, you're going to have to move off one of them. So that trade is complicated. It's very difficult to get that guy without moving Julius Randle. Obviously, in a perfect world, you'd get Miles Turner himself, who Indiana's never trading to New York, I don't think. You get Brook Lopez if that's not working out in Milwaukee. You get, now from a cap perspective, you Julius Randle and maybe Mitchell Robinson have to be in that trade. So it is tough to do. And if you ask me to pinpoint the guy, I can't say I've gotten there yet. Maybe it's someone who will break out and emerge during the season. But to me, it is just too risky to go into the playoffs with Mitchell Robinson as your center, because one, again, at the highest levels, I don't know if he can hold up offensively just because he is so damaging to your spacing. And we saw 2 years ago in that Miami series, like after he was maybe their best player against Cleveland and probably should have forced Jared Allen to go play in Europe or the G League for a couple of years and just totally bullying him. He didn't look as good against Bam Adebayo. And if he's not physically dominating, like his utility on offense is very, very limited. Defensively, I think this is where I'm being a little bit unfair. Like, I thought he was brilliant at the start of last year, which is the only time he was fully healthy. Like, I thought he was a legit deserving candidate for an all-defensive team, someone who maybe should have gotten like a couple third-place votes for Depoy. Like, I thought he was playing that good on the defensive end to start last year. Like, he's a fantastic player in that respect. You hope his finishing comes back. You hope his free throw shooting doesn't go down for the 5th straight year. There are worlds where he's a useful player. I think the defense with him, Anunoby, and Bridges on the floor is going to be spectacular. So I don't want this to be the crap on Mitchell Robinson fest. I just think like the spacing issues are too substantial. And to your point, the injury risk is so high. And if you go in with the center rotation and anything happens to him, like that's it. This team that the Knicks, I hate to say it, but after trading 5 first-round picks, like it's not cute anymore if they make the second round and they're really spunky and they upset or quote unquote upset the Sixers team that maybe should have beaten them without Julius. Like year 3 of that, after you trade all your assets to go get Mikal Bridges, that's all of a sudden not good enough. And I think with Mitchell Robinson, that's when they will top out as not quite good enough. So I do think there has to be an upgrade there, even though I love Mitch, even though he's the longest tenured Knick, even though like all like the best thing I could imagine in my life is Mitchell Robinson lifting that championship trophy at the end of the year. I just don't think it happens with him.
Well, at least there's got a lot of people who are friends on that team. Let's talk about the team record for this upcoming season. Like we said, they were the number 2 seed last season, and Gavin, you're predicting them to have a lot of wins, 56 and 26. Because if there's one thing we know is that Tom Thibodeau is going to play every single game to win. In the regular season, he will do that. Now, we can argue or dismiss the idea that maybe that mentality led to the top 6 paid players being injured at the end of the season. There's some truth to it. There's some that's not true, but like that he's going to do this. 56 is a lot. I'm not sure they get quite there, but it's definitely possible. And it is going to be one of those. That's a really intriguing thing to see. Again, the question is blindingly obvious about this team, and now we get to see how the answer is. I think 50 wins feels like an absolute lock, and then we go from there, Gavin. But to end this show, I've been doing this with all the guests and a little bit of a pop quiz for these for you guys who cover the team.
Boy. This makes me so tense. Josh, go ahead.
Don't worry. It's not super difficult, I don't think. But what we have is the 24-25 season is upon us. So all I want to know from you, in New York Knicks history, there have been 16 players who have worn number 24 or number 25. And I'll give you the hit. Number 24 is actually a retired number. Who's the first player that comes to mind to you that's been a number 24 or number 25 on this team?
This is the worst thing you could have asked me. I am someone who does not remember numbers at all. I know Stephon Marbury was number 3 because that was my first jersey I ever had. I can honestly say I have no idea who's ever worn 24 or 25 for the Knicks. I'm trying to picture to my mind. If you want to give me a hint or something, go ahead. If you want to spoil it for me, go ahead. I do not really remember numbers.
There was someone on the team last year who wore 25, but 24 was retired. And the last time someone wore number 24 for the Knicks was in 1977. If that gives
1970. Yeah, sure. I am gonna. Who retired in 19? Would it be like? I'm gonna just throw out some names: Phil Jackson,
Nope.
Jerry Lucas.
Nope.
One of those two.
Too
early.
From memory, this man.
Bill Bradley.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Bill Bradley. Yeah. Is Bill Bradley the guy who transitioned into politics? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes, he was a New Jersey congressman. I think ran for president briefly.
Last year's number 25 was the man, the key part of the Bridges trade, Mamadi Diakite. Reggie Bullock was number 25. Derrick Rose was number 25 on this team. And, of course, the legend Timofey Mozgov also wore number 25 for the New York Knicks. Gavin, we're not here to talk numbers anymore, though, because we're here to end the show. So thank you for coming on and chatting about this Knicks team that is going to be plastered across our screens all season because they're the Knicks and because they're good. And now we've got this big question to answer. So what's going on for you guys over at Locked On Knicks at the moment?
Yeah, so we are wrapping up the summer. We are going to start getting into player previews. Next week, we're going to do some FanDuel over-unders, an annual summer tradition that we have not done yet. So I'm going to get into, Josh, this is a podcast maybe one day. Would love to have you on for with your knowledge of every team in the league. We do future team rankings every year where we basically just rank, all right, if you're drafting the next 5 years of a team or like which team you'd want to own right now, what order would you take them in? And the Knicks, for me, have like kind of consistently been middle of the road, sometimes closer to 2022. I can't remember if we did it last year, but last year they probably would have been like top 10-ish. And now I'm wondering if they get up to top 5. Alex is always a little bit higher on them. I try to take off my orange and blue glasses. So we're going to do that maybe in a week or two. That's going to be a lot of fun. So people should tune in for that. And then, of course, once the regular season gets underway, we'll be, of course, back to 5 episodes a week, full time, full bore. If you're a Knicks fan, this is the ultimate time to tune into the Ultimate Knicks podcast, because they, at least in my lifetime of fandom, have never been better, have never been more exciting, have never been more interesting. So I'm really excited to get into it.
It is an exciting time for Knicks fans, and Locked On Knicks is going to have you covered. Gavin, thanks again for coming on and chatting about the Knicks with me.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. I can genuinely say this is my Locked On podcast highlight of every year. So I always enjoy it. I always jump to do it ahead of Alex. He's always upset when I do. So thanks for having me.
And that is the end of today's show. Don't forget to jump in here, give us the thumb, give us the double bang, subscribe. We've got the Phoenix Suns team preview coming tomorrow, so make sure you're tuning in for that and all of the other shows that are happening across the network. Not sure exactly the timing of when this one is out, so whether there's any sort of Yahoo information released or not, I don't know, but that will be coming when we get some info on that as well. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.